So inevitably, our job is to integrate the threading we just talked about into our project. So I have our project back up from last time, the place where we left it off. And so we have the server here. And the server at this point is single threaded. It'd be really hard for you to test this because you have a single computer. You'd have to have many, many, many clients running at the same time, and you'd have to really slow down this behavior to be able to see it. Because what it's essentially happening is it does indeed deal with one client at a time. You see it when it doesn't accept, it stops and it does one client at a time. And from there, you have to wait until I go and have that whole conversation with that one client before I close it out and then loop around to come off to the next client. The reality is that whole conversation probably lasts less than certainly a quarter of a second, probably less than 10 milliseconds. So at the human perception rate, you would never see a slowdown. You'd have to have 20, 50, 100 of them lined up in order, 20, 50, 100 GUIs lined up in order to be able to see anything. There are ways to kind of force it and make that stuff happen if we designed it a little bit differently, but we didn't want to design it a little differently because the way this is designed is very similar, as we'll see, to the way a web server works. We'll see that when we get to a later phase. But nevertheless, we want to add in threading inside of here. So the first choice we have to make here is how do we break up this functionality to properly insert threading. Now, before we make that choice, what I want to show you is how we can refactor our code, improve the design of the code to separate out the different behaviors that are happening to begin with. It's not essential, but by doing that, I think we can see a little bit easier where the threading will fit in. So if we break down the logic of what's happening in the server, we're going back a little bit, but we open up a server socket. So this is socket work, communication with the client work. We have accepting a socket from the server, and then we're opening input and output streams. So between this line right here of accepting the socket and these lines right here, we've kind of shifted gears. So the first is setting up the plumbing. It's installing a phone line. The second seems like an extension of it. On the surface, it kind of sort of is, but what it is it's creating the I/O streams that are allowing the communication. It's essentially sitting down a customer service agent at that desk, them putting a headphone on their head. I'm establishing the microphone in the right spot. I'm establishing the earphone in the right spot to be able to hear stuff. That's what these two lines of code are doing. And then the rest of this code that's happening right here is managing that conversation. It's the script for the customer service representative to say, hello, how can I help you? Yeah, I can look that up for you. Let's do it. And so on and so forth. And so what I want to do here is instead of just jumping straight into threading, let's improve the design a little bit by creating a new Java class. And this will be our, it doesn't really matter what we name it. It's our server conversation. We're returning some data, and we'll say client manager inside of here. This is going to be how we have a conversation with the client, let's just say. Again, the name of this is less important. I'm sure you can come up with a better name than I have right here on the spot. But what we want to do here, essentially, is we want to have a conversation. So we want to go through, and for this client, we don't need to return anything. We're doing all the work ourselves. And we'll say, converse with client. And we have to decide what this interface is going to look like. Now, instead of making the choice right away, let's kind of move some of the code and decide what all we need. So we could define the interface right away. That would be having a good understanding of the features and everything else like that. Since we've already built it, since we're in a refactoring mode, let's just look what lines of code we want to move and decide what data is appropriate here. So I made the distinction between the socket. Once I get the socket, then I want to go have a client conversation. So let me just take all of this stuff in between. So essentially what we're saying is my server logic is create a socket, get a client, talk to the client, close that socket, and then go get the next one. That seems like a pretty simple set of steps right there. So let me start by taking all this code here. I'm going to copy it for the moment, and I'm going to paste it because I don't want to lose anything along the way. All right, and then when I paste it, you can see it gives me the option to import all these things. That's good. And then I'm going to go back up to this guy and tab it over a little bit. And now when I save it, I have a couple issues here. So I don't have a socket coming in. I don't have this get names method anymore because that's from the other one. And the values, oh, there's an exception that has to be dealt with here. So that's fine right there. So let's start with making our data correct. So the socket. So one of the options I can do here, since I need a socket object, is I can pass a socket object into my solution. Now, do I want to pass a socket object in? Well, on the surface, yeah, that's easy. It's a quick fix. But that means I'm limiting this client manager to only talking to sockets. It's not necessarily the worst thing ever, but it gives me slightly less flexibility. So what I can do instead of saying socket.getInputStream here, I can just basically make this an input stream. I can call this in, and I can call this out. And up here, instead of adding in a socket, I'm sorry, I need in stream and I'll call it out stream for a moment, because if I call it in and out, it's the same as what this guy is right here. So I can say input stream, control space, in stream, comma, output stream, control space, out stream. All right, and so now, oh, I have an exception issue. Okay, well that's good. At least I have my input taken care of. I'm going to do Alt-Enter, because that fixes my errors already. I'm going to add a throws clause for IO exception. That takes care of a lot of them. That takes care of all of them, actually, except for getNames. So getNames is that method we created beforehand as part of the server. And guess what? GetNames here doesn't really have anything to do with the socket work. The main part of this class is to deal with sockets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this whole class, this whole method, excuse me, and I'm going to copy it, cut it, take it out of here, and I'm going to go down to the client manager and I'm going to paste it inside of here. And so now, I have one more exception I have to deal with, class not found exception. Alt-Enter. I'm going to throw that as well. Okay, so now all I've done here is I've really just moved some code from the server class into the client manager class. I haven't really done anything except for do that and define an interface here by passing these guys. So now going back to my server class, making it big here, these lines of code that I cut out before, I'm going to delete them now. And I'm going to change this to be a client manager, control space, which is called CM, new client manager. All right, so create a new instance of a client manager, and then I can say CM dot converse with client, and I need to give it an input stream, which I can get from my socket. I need to get an output stream, which I can get from my socket. And now I've refactored my code. See, I have a bunch of extra imports up here. I can do Control-Shift-I, and then they all go away. Control-Shift-I is fix imports. So you go right-click. You can actually find that in the list here. Fix imports, Control-Shift-I. All right, so all I did here, really, I haven't done anything with threads at this point. I've done some refactoring to get myself into a position to be ready to do the actual work of my of my assignment here. Okay, I'm setting myself up for threading. I've made my life simpler so I can deal with threading a little bit easier here. All right, so I have my client manager, and now doing that, let's test it out. Let's make sure it all runs so I can run my server. All right, I don't have any prints here, so it seems like it's running okay. I can come back. I need to shrink this down real quick. I go to my client. I say run my client, and it's going to pop up my GUI here, and I can say get names, and there you go. One got the get names, get places, boom. So I have get names, get places, and it's all back and working again. If I really want to test this out a little bit better, I can put some right lines into here. I can do some debugs. I can step through it, but it was working before. I've reestablished the place it was working. All I've really done was move some code around. That's refactoring. So again, why did I do this? I did this to simplify the work I have going on inside of here. So now, in the next step, after you go back and do this refactoring yourself, we'll figure out how to add this the threading. And it's going to be much easier because instead of dealing with all these lines of code that we have to figure out where the threading goes, we only have to deal with 2 lines of code that represent them now. That'll make our life significantly simpler as we go and do this. So go ahead and do this refactoring. Move this around to try this out. Again, it's not required per se for the implementation of the threading, but something very similar will need to get done. And so by doing this step, we can certainly make our life a little bit easier. All right, so do that and we'll come back.